In the northwest corner of Cambridgeshire, between Peterborough and the A1, there's a world of lakes and woodland where wildlife is as diverse and abundant as anywhere else in Europe. It's called Nene Park, and it lies along 6 miles of the meandering River Nene. Its story is amazing. Nene Park boasts more than 1,700 acres of rich, diverse, natural-looking landscape. But the landscape is not natural, because the park is almost entirely man-made. It's generally thought that the town planners in Britain in the 1960s and 70s made 1 or 2 mistakes, but Nene Park is surely one of their greatest successes. In 1968, the government took the decision to make Peterborough a new town and sparked a period of rapid growth and change that would transform the city. Under the master plan, outlying villages would become townships, and their spread would create an urban area with a population more than double that of the existing city. Bretton, Werrington, Paston, Fletton and the Ortons were to be linked by a system of efficient dual carriageway roads known as parkways that would circle the old city centre. The construction work would need thousands of tons of aggregate, sand and gravel that was to be found in abundance along the Nene Valley, in an area that had been earmarked for a much-needed country park. Then the engineers at the Peterborough Development Corporation had the brilliant idea of combining the need for building materials with the idea of the park, and carefully shaping the excavations to form pre-planned lakes. The sand and gravel was extracted for the parkways, and Nene Park began to take shape, with the lakes of Ferry Meadows at its heart.
We had the most wonderful opportunity with a river extending from the city centre 7 miles out into the countryside, all in private ownership, inaccessible to the people of Peterborough, and we could change all of that. We could bring that land into public ownership, and we could make it accessible to everybody that lived within Peterborough and indeed in the area around. And that was very exciting, because nothing like that had really been attempted before. And as we know, Nene Park eventually became one of the top 10 country parks in the country, generating something like 1 million visitors. So it's very exciting to work in the Development Corporation at that time. The opportunity to continue to be involved in the park was absolutely thrilling for me. I always said that I was one of the luckiest town planners in England to be working in Peterborough on the New Town project, and in particular on this park project.
The road building programme was completed within 10 years, and in 1978 the park was officially opened by botanist and broadcaster David Bellamy. The Development Corporation was wound up in 1988, and the Nene Park Trust was created to manage and protect the park. Its founding objective was to provide for the recreation of the public by the provision of a park for the benefit of the inhabitants of Peterborough and visitors, with the object of improving the conditions of life for such persons. A quarter of a century later, the Trust's work is based on its original aim.
When I arrived here 5 years ago as the new Chief Executive of Nene Park Trust and Nene Park, one of the first things I had to do was look at a new 10-year strategy for the park and for the Trust. And I worked with our Board of Trustees, all of our staff team, and looked at what our visitors were telling us. And what seemed to come through very clearly was that our original objectives as a charity, to provide a park for Peterborough people and visitors to the city to improve quality of life, was just as relevant now as it was in 1988, and will stay relevant, so we kept that exactly the same. There was some really careful thought that went into the design of Neame Park back in the 1980s, making it accessible for all of our visitors, but we want to take that one stage further. So 2 years ago we commissioned an audit, an inspection of the whole of Neame Park by one of the country's leading access consultants, and she looked at how we can make it accessible to people from all backgrounds and all abilities, and worked with those groups across Peterborough to look at the park and test out all of our facilities and landscapes. There's a huge amount of time and effort that goes into providing Neame Park, and one of the things that surprises me when I go and talk at local schools is people think we just cut the grass and pick up the litter. In fact, we have about 30 staff working for us at the Trust, and we have over 50 volunteers who are engaged in work right across the park, in conservation tasks, in photographing the park and recording our wildlife, and in talking to visitors and providing events and education as well. So it's a huge operation happening right throughout the year, and through operations like our visitor centre as well, which is open almost every day of the year. People's awareness of nature and conservation has changed hugely in the last few years, and people are looking to connect with nature even for very quick experiences on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday morning for a walk. And one of the things that we've done in the last 3 years is grown our education service, so we're bringing hundreds of children through here in the week who are hopefully returning at the weekend with their parents to look at Neame Park and to explore bits of it that perhaps won't be obvious to the first time visitor. So trying to find ways that people can connect with nature and still have a space for recreation is one of our main objectives at the moment.
New educational play trails and the redevelopment of the Water Sports Centre are just two of the big projects underway in 2013. The Neame Park Trust is a registered charity and holds a 999-year lease on the park. Every year it spends more than £1.8 million on managing and maintaining it. This is entirely self-funded through rental income from commercial and park properties, concessions and investments. There is no cost to the taxpayer.
The Development Corporation used a lot of foresight and quite inspirational thinking about the long-term future of the facilities that we see today. As a consequence of that, funding and resources were invested to create an endowment for the organisation, which does provide a steady income stream that will fund the facilities as we move forward.
Well, of course, the park was designed to serve Peterborough, and one of the objectives that I picked up was the need to continue to develop the park as Peterborough expanded. The situation changed quite dramatically with the completion of the housing stock at that time, and also the landscape itself took a few years to settle in. So the development of the landscape, and indeed the development of the staff and the relationship between the park and the city.
When you consider Peterborough in 1968 had a population of around 68,000 people, and now has a population just over 184,000 people, with a prediction that it's going to grow to in excess of 190,000 people by 2020, you start to then appreciate the importance of areas of open space such as this.
What the park has given to Peterborough residents is the opportunity to have somewhere to come into the countryside and enjoy the fresh air in the park. We have over 1 million visitors a year now, so it shows how the city needs not only its environmental structure within the city, but it needs its outside environment for the families.
Neame Park and Ferry Meadows in particular, it's obviously green space, but it is very inspirational green space. And I think it's fair to say that for a number of years, whilst known at a local level, in some respects was also a well-kept secret. So over the last 5 years, a lot of work has been placed upon promoting and marketing all the opportunities that are actually available here.
It takes 25 years for a man-made environment like Neen Park to start to mature. The ancient woodlands are complemented by the newer planting, and the landscape begins to look timeless again. Only the superb facilities and access to them reveal the role human hands have played in the creation of the park. Nature rarely makes its own beauty so easy to enjoy. But what does the future hold for Neen Park?
As a charity, Neen Park Trust has a 999-year responsibility to provide the park, and we're only 25 years into that, so it's very early days for us, and the landscape is starting to mature, and the organisation is looking very carefully at what it might be doing for the next 25 years. But what we're very mindful of is that landscape and the Neen Park experience for our visitors must stay one about connecting with nature and unspoilt access to the countryside, with great facilities as well, but places to connect and places to escape the pressures of the city.